Letter 20. The Return of Machno.
As promised, I want to tell you about the terrible happening that I mentioned in the end of my last letter. Yes, a terrible and dreadful experience it was. The White Army had advanced far into the northern part of the country, leaving the south unprotected. Machno and his band had joined the Red Army previously, and together with them had been driven back. But a man like Machno could not, for long, take orders from his Red superiors and was looking for a chance to separate from the Red forces and be on his own again. This chance came when his scouts detected a weak spot in the front line of the White Army. Machno concentrated all his might at this spot and broke through the lines like the spring waters of a mighty river break through a dam, leaving death and destruction in its wake. The first fury hit the Mennonite villages of Sagradovka, which lay far north of the Machno colonies. Several villages there were razed to the ground, killing the people and burning the buildings. Others were partly saved depending on the mood of the killers. Like an avalanche, Machno and his followers rolled into the open, unprotected land, killing, burning, robbing. They finally reached the Korčica colony, where they decided to stay over winter. What those people lived through that winter is recorded in a book entitled A Russian Dance of Death by Dietrich Neufeld and translated into English by L. Reimer. A large group of them came further south until they appeared at the outskirts of the Machno colony in Altonau on November 10th, 1919. They shot several people there and moved on to Ohrloff, the village we lived in. They came on wagons, 3 and 4 to a wagon. Many were on horseback, all of them armed to the teeth, a rifle over the shoulder, 1 or 2 revolvers behind the belt, a long saber hanging on the left side. They wore all kinds of clothes stolen from the people. Some had black tailcoats on, the kind that men wore to communion or some festivities, weddings, funerals, a high black hat on the head, a regular masquerade. One could have laughed if the situation had not been so serious. Mr. Hubert, my friend's father, saw them coming and was hurrying home when a rider stopped, took aim at him with his rifle, and shot him dead right there on the sidewalk. Mr. Jansen across the street was beaten, robbed of his money, and then shot. 2 elderly men, father and son, the father a widower, the son a bachelor, were killed in cold blood, leaving the house empty.
Letter 21. Witnessing the Horror.
Very reluctantly, I shall continue the sad story. I watched from a hidden place how this band of robbers and killers moved along the village street with great noise, shouting, hollering, swearing at the bourgeois, promising revenge. They moved on toward the next village, Blumenort, only a mile away, where they said they had to square up with the villagers who had done them some wrong. In reality, none of the villagers was involved in what had happened in Blumenort about a week ago, when a man belonging to the Machno people staying overnight in the village was killed by a detachment of the militia who knew of his presence there. They stayed in Blumenort a long time. We could hear the shooting, the shrieks, the screams of the tortured people. After some time, we saw smoke, thick, black smoke rising in many places of the village. Night came, and finally everything became very still. They must have left, we thought, but nobody dared to go there. Not until next morning, when Reverend B.B. Jantz, who later became one of the leaders in the immigration process, was seen walking towards the ill-fated village, Bible in hand. When warned by some not to go there, he said, "Brethren, we have to go and see what happened there and help with whatever we can." He was back in a few hours, and the tidings he brought with him were even more gruesome than anticipated. Over 20 people dead, some shot, some cut up with sabers. A group of men had been driven into an underground cellar, used as a storage place for the village store, machine gunned, and a few hand grenades thrown in for good measure. Many had fled into the surrounding orchards and forests. To many of the houses and barns, fire had been set, and they went up in flames, often with the owner shot inside, sometimes with their family members. Livestock in the barns were bellowing for food. Cows needed to be milked, and their calves milk-fed. A happy and prosperous community just the day before, and now everything in ruins. And why? Why were the questions of many of us as we tried to find answers for them? Where did we go wrong to evoke such hate?
Letter 22. Living as refugees in Ohrloff.
After the episode described in the last letter, we enjoyed a time of relative calm. The Machno bands were dispersed by the White Army, and we endured a time of relative peace. It was during this time that we moved from Tiga to Ohrloff, a distance of approximately a half-mile. This, in the overcrowded villages, was possible only because one farmyard was freed. The inhabitants, father and son, were killed by the Machno bands, and the place was now taken over by a relative, and we in turn were fortunate in getting the place this relative moved out from. We got a house, although small, all for ourselves, and we also got the use of stable and barn. We were all very happy to be able to make this move, as it gave us enough room for all our possessions. Now we had to get acquainted with the villagers and adapt their lifestyle, which was really not too difficult. Our 5-year sojourn in Ohrloff could be counted among the happiest in my life. The social life in a village like Ohrloff, the common interest of people, its advanced schools, churches, library, and other institutions cannot be overstated. After the more or less lonely years on my parents' estate, where all we had to associate with were our Russian neighbors and laborers, most of whom could neither read or write, and although likable people, had no formal education, this seemed like an entirely different world altogether. Sure, it was not all roses and pleasure. About 2 years later, the country entered into a phase of the most terrible famine. Due to the communist government, which came into complete control at the beginning of 1921, and which, in order to keep its people in submission, introduced the most rigid laws and regulations concerning food supplies, this great famine came into being. To be continued next time around. Much love from P Driedger.
Letter 23. The famine.
It was about the great famine that I closed the last letter. It was spread all over the great country of Russia. The long years of war, followed by the Civil War, had used up most of the supplies and had broken the will of the people to produce. Because of the uncertain future, the mismanagement of the new government, and partly also because of the government's idea that a hungry people were easier to govern and their thoughts diverted from the great political and economical changes that were taking place. All this and other reasons had brought the famine along. The Machno colonies were in many respects faring better than the great bulk of the Russian population. The reasons? Some could still draw on hidden supplies. Most all used what was left to them more wisely, by rationing themselves and by their ability to stretch and make do with less. At Christmas time of 1921, our father said, "From now on, we will start rationing our bread, potatoes, roots, and whatever supplies we have, just so much per day." This was hard. We never had near enough. We were always hungry. Our thoughts turned around eatables. At night, we dreamed about svibak and other delicacies that we had had in such abundance not so long ago. The rations became smaller, and towards spring, our supplies were nearly gone. We would rummage the fields in search of certain weeds that Mother would cook and prepare a soup. We would fill our stomach with soup, but would still be hungry as before. Father went to the market in the city, 20 miles away, and exchanged his black Sunday suit, tailcoat, for a pail full of cornmeal and some potatoes. We peeled the potatoes and planted the peelings in the garden and ate the inside. The cornmeal was made into bread and tasted great. I never cared for cornbread before. Many beggars, often children, came to our door begging for a small piece of bread, only a mouthful. Mother could never refuse them, even if she shared the last piece with them. At my friend's place, they had butchered a horse that was of no more use. In the evening, he brought me a meatball, horse meat. It tasted just great, but you have to be real hungry. Much love from P Driedger.
Letter 24. The Great Famine continued.
Yes, the great famine. It changes people, not only outwardly, but also inwardly. There were those who had nothing, their bodies emaciated, their clothes in tatters, dragging their feet from place to place, begging for something to eat. It was heartbreaking, especially the children. They would move until totally exhausted, lie down and die. In the Russian villages, it was a common sight, we were told. The colonies were spared the worst, although children with unduly expanded bellies were not uncommon. Then there were those who, despite all the restrictions of food supplies on the part of the government, had still managed somehow to secure some supplies and by clever rationing could hold out. They, of course, had to harden their hearts to the misery they saw all around them. That is what I meant by saying famine changes people. It may bring out the worst in them, but also the best, compassion, brotherly love, etc. The latter became evident when the great American relief action set in. Rumors of it had been making its round many weeks before, and the first shipments finally arrived. And it was about the high point of the famine when they finally did come. and a real lifesaver they were. Joy and new hope were everywhere, and thanks to God and our brothers and sisters in America who hadn't forgotten us. A committee in each village was appointed whose duty it was to see to it that those who needed it most were served first, then the others, depending on need. Not always was the distribution in accord with the strict regulations set out by the American Mennonite Relief Association. Human nature, being what it is, had its role in it. Our family, consisting of 9 members, the youngest 2 were John, age 2, Annie, age 4, received 2 half rations. The rest were considered adults and were expected to work. But there was no work to be had, and we were newcomers in the village. Much love from P Driedger.
Letter 25. Struggling Throughout, 1922.
With the coming of spring and the American relief still coming, the worst eased off a little. New hope was filling the hungry people's hearts. People began preparing for a new crop, but there was practically no seed and no power to pull the plow. We had 1 horse left by the Red Army after they took our good horses with them one by one. He was but in poor shape and plagued with a skin disease. What he needed most was good food that we didn't have. We also had a cow, and with the new grass beginning to grow, there was hope that she would improve from her emaciated condition. One of our neighbors still had 2 cows, so we agreed to work together. We had a light 3-furrow plow, so we hitched the neighbor's 2 cows to the plow and our 1 horse and 1 cow in front of them. We lowered just 1 share and left the other 2 up. Now we were ready to go. One of the boys was to drive the 2 cows, another the 1 horse and 1 cow team, and the third one to scatter the seed, corn or sunflower seed, into the furrow. A 4th one was watching the whole procedure and was ready to change off anyone, man or beast, that would weaken. I now wish I could have taken a picture of that whole outfit to prove that it really was true. On the next round, the seed was covered, hoping that the hungry crows hadn't picked up too much of it. On the 3rd round, a strip of land was left unplowed, and a 2nd row of seeding was started, hoping to just hoe the weeds sometime later on the unplowed strip. Yes, proceedings were very, very slow, as both humans and animals were weak and emaciated from hunger. That spring, we were able to put in a little crop, but by far most of the good and fertile land had to be left unattended for lack of the necessary things. The list could be long. From P Driedger.
Letter 26. Showing Resourcefulness.
The year 1922 was a rather harsh one. In the spring, only a small part of the land was put into crops for lack of seed and pulling power. And so, of course, the harvest was only small too. There were shortages on every count. As the country was in ruins, there was practically no manufacturing. Clothing and material to make clothes out of was not available. Shoes or boots were not available anywhere either, so people had to help themselves. Our neighbor, who was handy with tools, started to make wooden sandals and selling them to needy people. In time, this grew into a little shop with several craftsmen working there. Their sandals became of better quality, some real fancy ones, and they had no trouble selling them. The demand was great. There were still a few spinning wheels around. They served as models to make new ones. Our father made several. The women and young girls had again to learn to operate them. Sheep raising came into being again, their wool a much wanted article. Sweaters, jackets, socks, underwear were knitted from this wool. A long-forgotten trade was again revived. The silkworm industry, too, was revived. Our mother had the attic of our house just crawling with them. We boys were kept busy providing the feed for their insatiable appetites. Mulberry leaves is all they would eat, and the many mulberry hedges in our village were soon robbed of their foliage. We were glad when they finally spun themselves into cocoons. Later, the cocoons were boiled to kill the worm inside, and then the cocoon had to be unraveled to secure the precious silk thread. This thread was then knitted into silk stockings and other ladies' wear. All this kept young and old always busy and away from mischief. Could be a good recipe for today's society. Much love from P Driedger.
Letter 27, conscription into the military in 22.
The year 1922 had another surprise for us all. The Red regime, now firmly established, was contemplating its first draft of young men into the army. All those born in 1901 were to appear in their respective centers for registration and inspection regarding their health and fitness for service. 6 young men of our village, 21 years old, were thus involved, and I was one of them. After being examined by several doctors and after answering many questions, some of them regarding our citizens, or should I say financial status, I was accepted, not into the active army bearing arms, but rather into one of the Army's many supply stores, provisions, and other secondary parts of the Army. The reason for this being my father's large land holdings. A son of such a man could not be trusted with arms. I was glad and thankful for this decision of the commissioner. It relieved me of my scruples I had as a Mennonite toward bearing arms. One more out of the 6 was not considered safe for the active army. The other 4 were soon designated for different army units and sent away. Our group was held back. Apparently, the authorities did not exactly know what to do with us. We were put into old army barracks, first in our regional center, then in our provincial capital, Alexandrovsk. They kept us busy exercising, marching, and the like. For a month, they sent us off into a nearby bush to make firewood. We were sent there by riverboat along the mighty Dnieper. This was my first and only chance to have a ride on this great and legendary river. The few weeks we lived in this bush, alongside the river, was quite an experience for us. We lived in shacks, dug into the ground and just a low straw roof over top of the hole. Like rats or other animals we lived. It was wintertime, shortly before Christmas. The supplies we had brought along were soon used up, and we sent a delegation back to bring us some more. When they didn't return, we all went back to Alexandrovsk. With only a few days left till Christmas, they let us go home to celebrate Christmas. Much love from P Driedger.
Letter 28, riding the army trains.
After our short furlough, a few days before Christmas, we had to go back to Alexandrovsk. Here we received the necessary papers and were sent to our destination by train. The army unit to which we were assigned had its headquarters in the city of Nikolachev, a Black Sea port. It took almost a week to get there, and we had all kinds of experiences on the way. When we started out, it was night, and the train we rode on, a cattle train, was loaded with people hunting for food. The famine was not yet over, and these people were called the baggers. They went from place to place with their bags, collecting food wherever and in whatever way it could be found, even stealing. There was no light in the car, and we sat in complete darkness. All of a sudden, I noticed our train rolled slower and slower and finally stopped. It must be a station, we thought, and opened the door a bit to look out. But no station was to be seen. We were in the middle of nowhere. We looked to the front. There was no locomotive. Then it dawned on us that part of the train had come loose and stopped, whereas the front part had continued on. After a long time, the conductor must have noticed this, and so he backed up and hooked up again with us. This only is to give you an illustration of how chaotic conditions were in post-war Russia. Well, we continued our journey after this interruption and finally arrived in our provincial capital, the city of Ekaterinoslav. Here we were told that we had to change trains and that the next train to Nikolachev would leave in 3 days. And the outlook for a happy and Merry Christmas was a rather dreary one. Nevertheless, there was nothing we could do about it. Much love from P Driedger.
Letter 29, Reporting for Duty.
Finally, after 3 long days and nights of waiting, our train arrived. We boarded it, and now we're on our way to our destination, the city of Nikolachev, so named after Tsar Nicholas I. There was no receiving party at the station, and so we picked up our few belongings and went searching for the staff office of the 15th Division. When we finally found it, we reported our arrival and asked for further directions. To our dismay, we found out that they had not expected us. And not only that, they even didn't know what to do with us, as we were Mennonites and could not be trusted with arms. So they put us up in an empty house to await further orders. We were there for about a week when, while out on the street, we met a group of Mennonite boys, quite accidentally, who were already installed on a horse breeding farm about 10 miles out of town and were now in town on an errand. Were we ever glad to see them? And could they not use more men on that place? Oh, yes, they could. The whole project was still in the stage of being set up, they said. So we asked for permission by our authorities to join the new outfit and were gladly given it, as they were glad to get rid of us. By the way, this horse breeding farm was a project of the army. Russia had lost so many horses during the war and its aftermath that there was a great need of them. So we went with these boys to this new place with great anticipation. As it turned out, the place was a big estate, belonging to a Russian aristocrat. The family had either to leave in a big hurry or maybe was killed when the communists took over. Anyway, now the place belonged to the people, as the saying went. It wasn't always clear as to who the people really were. A large expanse of buildings came into view as we drew closer. Here I was to stay for almost a year and a half. More of this in the next letter. Much love to you all. Love, Grandpa.
Letter 30, The Horse Farm.
There were large barns for the many horses and cattle, and dwellings for the many hired hands that were needed to run the big estate. Most of the buildings were of mud brick and then whitewashed inside and out. Only the owner's house was built of red brick. It looked very fashionable compared to the others. This was the house that the new leader had chosen for himself. He was, as we later came to know, the representative of the army, a young married man, and he wore the title of War Commissar. His duties were more or less to look after law and order. He knew but very little of horse breeding and farming. His name was Alexei Basubov. For the actual breeding program, the army had chosen an elderly Cossack, a former officer of the Tsarist army, known for their horsemanship. The new regime needed his expertise in this field. Otherwise, he was not to be trusted. He was being closely watched by the Red authorities, and the slightest misstep could mean death for him, as for so many of his comrades. He carried himself very erect, and one could see the old army officer in every one of his movements. To live on this narrow path cut out for him must have been very hard for him. The third man in power was the old foreman of the previous owner. He knew every building, every field, and was the only one really at home on the place and its surroundings. He was assigned a small house for himself and his family. He was the man to ask if in question about anything, and he knew most of the answers. His wife and daughter were to cook the meals for us all. When we arrived at this place, we were shown our quarters, a mud hut, as all the others. We unloaded our gear and moved in. Iron bedsteads awaited us, a rough table in the middle, a shelf around the room close to the ceiling to lay a few things on. And that was all the furnishings. The windows were very small and the ceiling quite low. The whole thing not very inviting. Tell you more of my experiences at this place next time around.
Letter 31, Horse Farm Duties.
We were a bit disappointed that first evening, but on the other hand, we're glad to have escaped the regular army life with its daily marches, exercises, its strict discipline, etc. We were much more free here. The next day, we were assigned our work. Each of us received 4 horses to take care of. This included watering, feeding, bedding, cleaning and brushing, cleaning the stables, and exercising them. The water was in a nearby deep well and had to be hauled up in a big wooden pail and then poured into a long trough for the horses to drink. Hauling up the water was hard work, especially in the winter when everything was frozen stiff. Among my 4 horses, there was a beautiful brown mare, very lively and good to ride on. I used her to ride the horses to and from the watering trough. This I liked very much. There were other occasions when I could ride her to my heart's content, always bareback, of course. In time, I got so used to it, my seat didn't hurt anymore. I liked and loved my 4 horses, and to take care of them was mere pleasure. Early in the morning, our foreman would come and wake us up. The first one up was Cornelius Unruh, a tall, fine fellow, a good, trustworthy man. And the last one to crawl out from under his blankets was Jake Jansen, a lazy guy who always tried to get away with as little work as possible. In those days, I had made up a little poem which depicted life on that far away from home farm. The foreman, the Cossack officer, and the Red Commissar, their characters so different, 3 men from 3 different worlds, and how they were destined to live and work together. The whole thing was in the Russian language and could be sung to a, at that time, popular tune. The boys were not long in finding out about it and started singing it, which made me a bit uneasy, for fear it could come before ears that were not supposed to hear it. Our meals were quite frugal. Each got his weekly allowance of a piece of black rye bread. It was heavy. Then for breakfast, one of the boys would go to the kitchen and bring in a pail full of so-called tea with milk. We would stand, since there were no chairs, around the table, each one dipping into the pail with his tin cup and drinking the concoction with a piece of black bread. No butter, no jam, none of those fancy things that adorn our table today. For dinner, borscht, of course, with very little meat. Fish sometimes. More next time around. Love, Grandpa.
Letter 32. Attending the propaganda conference.
Many are the stories that could be told of the life on that faraway farm. One day, our commissar brought home with him a notice or declaration from the army office. It said that the administration had decided to organize a large get-together. Speakers had been invited, and preparations had been made for a week-long parley. The new Soviet government wanted to acquaint its citizens, and the army in particular, with its new program, its new laws, its humane intentions, etc. A big piece of propaganda for the new rulers. Each army unit could elect a delegate to these meetings, and we, too, could send a man from our group. So a meeting was called. The commissar explained the purpose of the meeting, and a delegate was elected. And I was to be the delegate, a German from all those many Russians. The next morning I got ready, got my papers, and was taken to town, Nikolachev. I reported to the proper authorities, got a place to stay assigned, got my meal tickets to the Army's restaurant, and reading material as to the place and purpose of the forthcoming meetings. I was being treated like an honored guest. I was quite impressed. The meetings were held in a large auditorium. The speakers were well trained for their jobs and overflowing with ideas of the coming of the new socialist state and the benefits this would bring to the lucky citizens. Paradise was about to come down on this earth. That is, only in the Soviet Russia. The rest of the world was still in bondage of capitalism. And it was the duty and privilege of the Red Army to stand on guard of these precious achievements of the working people. And so it went, day after day, in the same tone, in the same rut. I had a little booklet and made notes of what I heard, knowing quite well I would have to report on this. At noon, we stopped for lunch. It was about the best time of the day. We ate from regular dishes, forks, and knives, and the food was good. In the evening, we had theater with live casts, and they were good performances. I had a very good time, except for the speeches. Well, everything comes to an end, and so one day I found myself at the old farm again, and everything seemed like a good dream. Much love from P Driedger.
Letter 33. Working the night shift.
One more story about an incident that happened on that horse breeding farm. It was in late spring of 1923 when I was given the job of herdsman. That is, all the horses had been put on pasture for the summer months, and as there were no fences of any kind, somebody had to watch them so they would not blunder into grain fields nearby. One man had to watch them in the daytime and the other at night. I chose nights. Flies didn't bother the horses, and what's more, those Ukrainian summer nights were very, very beautiful. Not a breath of air. Everything was so still. You could hear the horses nibble at the grass, and the heavens just studded with stars, all those different formations or groups of stars. I knew many of them and could tell time by watching their movements across the sky. I've never seen a sky so full of stars here in Canada. Not in this part, anyway. So before sundown, I would saddle my horse, the bay mare that I told you about in a previous letter, pick up my long whip, about 12 feet long, with a 1.5-foot handle. Once on the back of the horse, I could sure handle that whip. It would crack like a pistol shot. But my horse, accustomed to it, wouldn't even twitch an ear. But the other horses knew what it meant and would usually stay in line. So after the horses had been watered, I would drive them through the gate and out to the pasture. The luscious grass soon got all their attention, and the whole herd grazed peacefully till about midnight, when one after another they laid down to sleep. I, too, was getting sleepy, and so I tied the end of my whip to the end of the bridle line and laid down in the grass. The handle of the whip was secured to my wrist. This gave my mare about a 15-foot radius for grazing around me. Everything was peaceful and quiet, and I let my thoughts wander to that faraway home of mine. What would they all be doing now? And my heart longed for them. The incident that is about to happen, I must tell you about that next time.
Letter 34. Injured at work.
Among that herd of horses, there was a heavy-set sorrel mare that did not want to stay within the fold and had her eyes on the nearby grain field. I had trouble with her already before, so when I opened my dreamy eyes, I saw her wander off toward that grain field. I jumped up and onto my horse. "This time you're going to get it, my sweetie," and I went after her in full gallop, my long whip on the ready. She saw me coming and started to run, but she was no match to my bay mount. I was soon upon her and let her have it, right and left across her rump. She squealed, and when she saw that she couldn't get away, she kicked up her hind legs once, twice, and when I got too close, she hit me hard on my right leg. I felt a sharp pain shoot up my leg. I let off of her and stopped my horse, dismounted, and examined my leg. There was blood in 2 places, and I could not stand on that leg. Fortunately, we were close to home, so I crawled on all 4s to our house, woke up one of the fellows, told him what happened, and sent him out to take care of the herd. I myself laid down on my bed. It was close to morning when our commissar, being notified, came to see what was the matter. We had no doctor there, so the wound was washed out and a bandage put on. As no sterilization was used, blood poisoning set in a few days, and my leg began to swell up dangerously. At this time, it was decided to take me to the hospital in Nikolachev. I will never forget that trip to town in a wagon without springs, on a bed of straw. Every unevenness on the road I felt over my whole body. We finally got to the hospital, where I was given a bath and put on the operating table. The wound was already infested, and they had to cut out some of it. But now I was at least in professional hands, and in about 2 weeks, I was ready to return home. I'm still wearing the scars of that experience on my leg. Until next time, Grandpa.
Letter 35. Released from duty.
Many more stories could be told of my sojourn on that faraway horse breeding farm, but I think this maybe is enough. The year 1923 was drawing to an end when news came that the great Russian leader Lenin was seriously ill and then suddenly died. This left the country in a somewhat precarious position. Russia was not a democratic country like Canada, but had been run by a dictator. Who would now emerge as the new leader? The most powerful, of course. It took some time before the powerful men at the top could agree on a new leader. But they finally did, and so much bloodshed could be averted. At this time, we began to hear rumors that all those born in 1901 would be released from military service and be sent home. We could hardly believe this, and anxiously waited for the government to confirm this. The decree came out in April of 1924, and towards the end of the month, we received our release papers and were free to go. I remember the day as if it had been yesterday, when we boys packed our belongings, put them high on the wagon, and we ourselves marched behind on foot towards Nikolachev, to the railway station. We were jubilant and in the best of moods. In Nikolachev, we boarded our train and soon were on our way home. In due time, I arrived in Lichtenau, our home station, said goodbye to my friends, some of whom had to travel a little further yet, and walked the remaining 3 or so miles to Ohrloff, our home village. I was still in my uniform, gray coat, peaked helmet on my head with a large red star in front. I did not particularly care to be seen in this outfit, and so took the shortest route to our house. Didn't even go through the gate, but rather jumped over the wall at the street, and there I was, home at last. I'm not sure who I met first, but I think it was my mother. It's hard, or rather impossible, to describe the feelings that ran through me after such a long absence, but I was happy, very happy. Much love to all of you. Your Grandpa.
Letter 36. Canada becomes an option.
My last letter ended with my homecoming from my military service. I was happy to be home, but I had to adjust to a completely different lifestyle again. Conditions at home were now better than what they had been when I left. Our landlady, a widow, had remarried and had moved with her husband into his house in Tiga, and had left us her spacious house to move into and live in it. This made a great difference. Not only did we get a bigger house and barn, but it also improved our status quo in the village. We were not just refugees in the village now, but were almost full-fledged citizens. As such, we had also to accept bigger responsibilities. We felt more and more at home in Ohrloff. It was at this time when talks about immigration to America became more realistic. An organization had been founded and registered with the government, with the purpose in mind to persuade the authorities to give their permission for the Mennonites to leave the country and to issue them the necessary papers passports, etc. The goal was Canada. Feelers had to be taken up with that country and our Mennonite brothers there to obtain permission to enter Canada. Two great men, next to God Himself, had surmounted insurmountable barriers to get this thing rolling. And the two men were, in Russia, B.B. Jans, and in Canada, Ältester David Tufts. We Russian Mennonites owe these two men our sincere thanks for making the immigration to Canada possible. Approximately 23,000 Mennonite people would leave that godless country and come to this wonderful land of Canada. Much love from Opa.
Letter 37. Preparing for the escape.
With this letter, we arrive at the year of 1924. A very important and significant year for many of the Russian-born Mennonites, our last year in Russia. Immigration talk became more intensive, and what had seemed a long way off suddenly came close to reality. Our immigration committee worked feverishly. Long lists had to be set up. Immigrants to be had to be notified of their doctor appointments. They had to be organized into small groups, the size that would fit into a railway car. Our family, too, had to appear before a medical commission. All, with the exception of Uncle Abe and Aunt Mary, were found to be fit for Canada. Abe and Mary had to have their eyes treated for a disease called trachoma, which would take a few months. The first shipment was scheduled for June, and this was in May, so we had to wait until those eyes were healed. In a way, we were glad to stay a little longer, and so have a little more time to prepare for the long trip. It also gave us time to take our crop off, and in all, to get used to the thought of leaving our homeland and facing an uncertain future. But Brother Peter, who was in danger of being mobilized for the army, was to go along with the first group. It was decided by the family. When the designated time for the departure of the first group came, a long train pulled into the station of Lichtenau. They were all cattle cars, not a single passenger car. One concession was granted the immigrants. The train would wait at the station until all the cars were washed and cleaned and suitable accommodations built into the empty room of the car. All, of course, at the expense of the travelers themselves. On the day of departure, the station was crowded with people. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people were milling around, helping to load, saying goodbyes, crying in each other's arms. For many it was for the last time. The feelings of the immigrants were twofold. Grief on the one side for leaving their beloved home and village, especially the older folks, and gladness on the other hand for leaving a godless country that had rejected them. When the train finally started to move, all the big crowd began singing, "God be with you till we meet again." It was very moving.
This concludes Part 2 of Letters to My Grandchildren.